because I believe in the history and development of our Caribbean civilization, that it's a great opportunity for us to share with our colleagues throughout the region and to have a meaningful exchange as we deliberate. Because as we know, COVID itself has no boundaries. It has descended upon us and it would have caught all sectors of our economy by surprise. The private sector, the public sector, government, trade unionists, and leaders in all forums, including churches. And when we look, for example, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, by observation, we can say to some extent that COVID would have impacted on our economy. Not because our economy, our economy of St. Vincent and Grenadines would have experienced more or less very little growth. For example, from 2017, we had an inflation rate of 2.15%. In 2018, 2.32%. In 2019, 0.91%. And in 2020, negative 0.61%. And then we had an economic growth in 2020 of 2.7%. I need to also say that in St. Vincent and Grenadines, currently, we have had 64 deaths as related to COVID-19. Yes, the vaccination is about 40,130. And we are seeing from last year where we had just about 11 deaths, we have seen a steady increase in deaths in St. Vincent and Grenadines, and it is something that we must take great note of as we plan and as we examine industrial relations. Now, the COVID situation in St. Vincent and Grenadines would have impacted on industrial relations in St. Vincent and Grenadines. Private sector employees and their private employers, and similarly, the public sector, of which government is the main employer, and the public sector workers. What we have seen is
Mr.
a big
Robinson,
challenge.
I am
Yes.
so sorry because you're delving right in, and I really like that. But let the others give their opening remarks.
Okay, thank you.
The footworks. But you've given us a very good frame, particularly in terms of what is happening in St. Vincent. It's not unlike what's happening here. Thank you so much for setting the tone with those opening remarks.
Thank you.
Let me move now to Dr. Antoine, our economist of Caribbean and really international renown, and ask you to give us your opening remarks for this forum.
Thank you very much, and pleasant night to my fellow panelists, and pleasant night to you, Ms. Parker, moderator. Wonderful hello to Antigua and Barbuda, and I know that you have many listening in the diaspora. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I want to get straight to the core of what I think is a very important topic coming at a very important time. I think tonight we have to traverse the issue. We're getting a lot of feedback from someone's mic, just tremendously so, almost like a windstorm, which makes it difficult to speak. If we can mute, that'd be very helpful.
Mr. Robinson, please remember to mute your mic. Oh, much better.
Oh, wonderful. So I think we have to place all of this in the context of what's happening globally and certainly in the region. I think there are a number of very important issues for us to traverse tonight. has COVID made, human relations and industrial relations as a facet of that more relevant, less relevant, more complex, with arrangements such as sort of work at home, away from the office. And I think there are a number of very challenging things arising in that context. And I know that there's a lot of excitement about what does it mean for worker rights, what does it mean for the level of employment, and what does it mean for job security. We're going to get into those things. But I think at the macro level, Antigua and Barbuda is facing a number of challenges, not unlike many of the other countries. You've told us about the statistics in relation to the growth in 2020, which was negative around 17%, depending on what number you believe. It's a shade of points. We know that as a result of the public policies, the government has tried to insulate to the extent that it could, and we could all disagree on the magnitude of that, but the policies by the states have been all similar, with sort of the lockdowns and the continuation of salary payments. That's caused the debt to GDP ratio to escalate. We know it's placed the system under tremendous stress. We know the private sector faces a number of very strong headwinds even now, where we have freight rates are rising rapidly. It's pushing up the cost of our product offering. We know that Antigua and Barbuda is in a particularly precarious position because more than 90% of the jobs, it's estimated, comes from tourism and travel, and hence what we do in terms of giving the security and the confidence that we are ready to receive and to engage in this COVID environment is important for economic activity and for industrial relations. And I think there are some bright spots. Antigua and Barbuda is not doing too badly when compared with the rest of the region in terms of its COVID vaccination rates. We can discuss what that means in terms of vaccination policy and worker rights, but these are real issues. And I think the way in which we navigate some of that in the discussion tonight will certainly add to the way in which I think the public and the private sector engages in this search for solutions. And to my mind, I think really this is an excellent opportunity at an excellent time, because we are in fact in the fourth quarter, and there is in fact an anticipation that Antigua and Barbuda, with what we've seen recently, may begin to see some regrowth. That regrowth could lead to a 1% or so in the first quarter in 2021. And so it's important for us to talk about how, as a society, we create a social consensus to emerge from this crisis. I want to say stronger, but I want to say first to recover, and then, of course, to consolidate that. Those are my opening remarks. I'm happy to be here with you tonight. Extremely important discussion. And I think, we're going to hear various perspectives, certainly from your panelists.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Dr. Antoine. I like two of your quotes. You said that we need to engage in a search for solutions. And certainly the question being, how do we create social consensus on this issue? Very apt. I now invite Ms. Mack for her open remarks. Ms. Mack, if you're hearing us, please share your opening remarks. You're muted. We're not hearing you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Yes, now I'm unmuted. Yes. Thank you very much, Ms. Parker. Let me say good evening to the panelists, my colleagues for tonight, as well as to our listening audience. It is an honor to be here to speak on this topic tonight, because when we look at industrial relations, as Mr. Rob earlier, we're looking at the relationship between employers and employees tonight from our union president perspective. So we are looking at the relationships that have been developed because of the COVID pandemic and its effect on Antigua and Barbuda, its effect on the working people, and as a result, the economic crisis that they're now facing, and what we can look at, what we can do to help alleviate some of the struggles, some of the pressure that's being placed on the employee as they struggle to survive on a daily basis.
Thank you
Those are my
very
opening
much.
remarks.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
This is exactly why we're here. We accept that challenge. I now invite Mr. Martin Cave. Did we lose him? We are really bedeviled by some serious internet issues tonight. I hope that it will dissipate as we move on. But I think our fourth panelist may have dropped out. Okay, we will await his return. Okay, so let us delve into this discussion. I will begin first by referencing one of the remarks that was made by Dr. Antoine, our economist here on panel. And you opened by stating that you asked the question, has COVID-19 made HR, right, the productive element of the economy? Has HR become more relevant or less relevant? We know that COVID-19 in its impact has really created an online society. There are many sectors of the economy that have differential impacts due to the constraints posed by COVID. So let me ask that question of our panelists. Based on what we have seen thus far, even within your various spaces, has COVID worked to displace labor in the economy? Or are we seeing an opportunity to increase that partnership between employer and employee? That is a very broad question. I invite you to answer it any which way. Okay, let
in
me
Antigua
start.
and Barbuda, speaking to unions,
Go right ahead.
oh Lord.
Hearing you.
Again.
I'm hearing you.
In Antigua and Barbuda, speaking to union presidents and from my nation, I have realized that the climate, the working climate, has a lot of workers are no longer motivated to go to work. I'm telling you straight up, they're no longer motivated to go to work. Especially in the education. The teachers are anxious back to face because there are so many issues facing them. There's so many challenges. When we look at the online virtual classroom, there's so many students at disadvantage from their home end. It's not a problem so much with the teacher, with getting the students online, keeping them focused and getting them to learn. It is difficult. I was an educator for over 41 years. And I keep saying to them, thank God, so I do not have to do this, because I noticed the strain on teachers. Teachers are trying, they're even packages. And it's difficult because parents are not collecting many of the packages. Even in the private sector, people are being pressured. In the private school, we are longing for the day when all students will return to face-to-face learning. We don't know when that will be, but education is critical to the development of any nation's economy. Let me repeat that.
Right.
Education is critical to the development of any nation's economy. And in Antigua and Barbuda right now, the education sector is in crisis, which means our economy as a country is in crisis. I keep saying to them, I'm looking at the fact that the youth today, in a number of years, maybe 10, 15 years, they're going to be my doctors, my caregivers. Ones will be our doctors, our nurses. Are we leaving them out in the cold at some point? It is critical. I don't have any children in school, but I feel for them because I've always loved children, which is why I went into teaching and why I stayed in teaching. I could have left.
Yes.
I'm feeling it for the parents who cannot afford to give each child a device. And I'm feeling it for the parents who do not even have one device in their house. So the children have to find a community center somewhere to log on. I'm feeling it for the parents who have to go to work and leave the children at home unsupervised, so you don't even know if they log on, even if they have devices. And I'm saying, if education is in a crisis, the nation's economy is in a crisis. Because that is where we need to start.
Right. We know the need to build a knowledge economy is really upon us now. Dr. Antoine, I invite your thoughts on this. You raised the question in your opening about human resources.
Yeah, well, I think there are two important things. I think we need to recognize that one of the important transformations that certainly is happening is the way in which we now engage as a Caribbean people, as a Caribbean society, with understanding the distinctions between work and, let us just say, employment. Let me put it this way. For many people, for years, if they told you they were going to work, it meant that they were leaving home and going to a physical place. The truth is that increasingly, particularly because of COVID, but this transformation started sometime before. It was slow in regions like ours, this sort of work from home type phenomena. And I think what we've just heard from my distinguished colleague who spoke so eloquently about education, Ms. Mack, is a manifestation of that. When she spoke at the beginning about teachers being demotivated, I want to broaden it to say that it is largely because we have a confusion between work as a place and work as an activity. And so teachers that are accustomed getting into the classroom, going to work, are having a difficult time making the transition. And so I might add many students, and I think it's a real set of issues, but I want to magnify it to see that is in fact just part of a sort of microcosm of what's happening across our society. It touches on another important thing that's key for us in our discussion today. We know that the productivity levels have been, in fact, one of those things we've been very concerned about at both the public and the private sector in the region for many years. You look at the level of productivity, the level of efficiency, you measure it. And certainly in many instances, we come up short in terms of our levels of productivity. And I think what this has done, this crisis, is that because we've not been able to wrap our hands yet around, how do we create environments at home where work takes place as an activity efficiently? We're certainly going to see some of the suboptimal performance that Ms. Mack spoke about. And certainly I would want to, at another time, engage in what this means for education in the way she's done. But I want to talk about at the societal level and say that I think what all of this has done is that it means that industrial relations and human relations has become a lot more important, because now we do need to define the protocols and we do need to define the modalities around which the activity of work takes place, though not in the physical place away from home. And that, my friend, is a challenge which is confronting all of the countries at this time. And it is causing tensions, I must tell you, because workers feel that they're now being made, many of them, they're being made to work, harder, to give out more and longer than if they were in the physical place. And many employers are unable, Brother Robinson, to measure it. How do I know for sure, right, that you really started at 8 and you finished at 9 or so on? And then there are issues inside of there. When you work at home, the benefits and so on that are attached when you are in the physical place away from home. How do you ensure that those benefits at a time of COVID transfer? All of those are issues that I think we now need to confront. I'm looking now at situations where there are increasing tensions, colleagues, over things like travel allowance, where you're not coming to work. Is travel allowance due? But it's a right, it's in my contract. But really, all of these things are now coming under stress. And increasingly, the issue of what are my rights at COVID, that has to come within it, but it must be based on a redefinition of work as a place and work as an activity, and then the protocols and so on behind that. That is my really response on that one.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Robinson, do you want to take a bite out of that, or can I pose another question to you then, based on what Dr. Antoine has said? Let me let you answer the question.
Yes, let me make my contribution to the discussion. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's not only COVID, right? I know we are discussing COVID now, but we have several things happening at the same time, simultaneously. We had dengue fever. Yes, we had COVID. Then we had the Lassa Fever eruptions. And the northeastern side of the country was impacted by the recent hurricane that hit that part of the island. Now, I would say that COVID itself would have impacted on the pockets of our teachers. Yes, we hear the argument that teachers are at home, but many of our teachers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines would have increased their expenses, because even before the state was ready with devices, there were teachers who had already bought their devices, and they would have upgraded their internet capacity to have faster, better quality internet. Okay? There are teachers at home also who have to monitor their own students while teaching online. You're using your own space. You're using more electricity. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our salaries would have been frozen for 2 consecutive years. From the time the onset of COVID came, our salaries were already frozen. There were no salary increases. The issue also has to do with inflation. We have had increase at the gas pump. For this year alone, we have had from March, April, May, right down to now, we have had increases. Our electricity bills have continued to escalate. And yet, people are expecting teachers to produce more. You see? But there is a cost to everything. If in 2015, the value of a $100 watt was almost $80 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and compare it now, where almost every item in the supermarket would have been increased, because you have to buy your mask, you have to pay more money for sanitization, disinfectant, and that sort of thing, right? So I agree with my colleague there that teachers are under severe pressure. But one of the things that we have to pay attention to is the unreliability of the internet. The internet providers, I have called on them on many occasions to raise their standard. Because if it's more reliable, teachers will be able to give more, to produce more. At the same time, we have to pay attention to the psychology that is involved in teaching. There are some students, because they are not accustomed to be online for so long, teachers have to take one step at a time. It is very crucial also for parents who have one device and they have to go to work. They have to make ends meet. They have to supervise their children. So the conversation that we're having here is a real one. It's one that touches the livelihood of everybody. And I agree that we have to find a way to have a conversation. From the onset of COVID in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I have been calling on the authorities for social dialogue. The International Labour Organization made a fundamental point when the G20 ministers met in April last year. Among the things that they mentioned, they said dialogue with the trade unions, the workers' organization, the workers' representative. And many times when the employer call you, they just call to tell you what they're going to do. That is their concept of consultation. We have put so many suggestions on the table, but nobody listening to you. And so we need to build that relationship so that we'll be able to move and maneuver and reach to the level that we could restore some form, I'm saying, of normalcy. Because we know COVID is going to be here for a very long time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Robinson. Just to alert the panelists that Mr. Martin Cave, our representative from the Chamber of Commerce, is trying feverishly to reconnect. And I do hope that he gets back on. Now, listen, we have two former educators here with us. And of course, the issue of education keeps coming up. But it is true that education is a key component in labor, right? And productivity and the type of labor force that you do have. But there are other issues which have been raised within that, the cost of living, the rising cost of living, and the like, and the need for governments to work closer with the trade unions. I want to ask our panelists, from where you sit, what we have experienced here in Antigua and Barbuda is a situation where our government, like all governments of the region, are trying desperately to get the economy up and running. Our model has not changed, or no effort has been made during COVID to try to rework our current economic model vis-a-vis our 80% dependency on tourism. Okay, so the impetus of government is to try to get the economy going, and they see this as being synonymous with vaccination. Okay, in terms of having as many workers as possible vaccinated. To what extent do you think that this emphasis has damaged, has moved workers' representatives further away from the type of dialogue and consensus building that should take place? And is that repairable? Let me start with Ms. Mack. Do we see that as being repairable? Yes.
I don't know if it is repairable, but there is a lot of damage which has been done because of, as Mr. said, no consultation. You're just told. You're just told. You're eating, and before you get to the meeting, there is a document out there stating this is what is going to happen. So why call persons, why call unions to meetings when you have already decided exactly what you're going to do? It is creating a lot of distrust. It's creating a lot of bad feeling. Let me call it that. So people stand towards unions because people are thinking that the unions are not representing them. And I don't think that that is so. Unions are trying their best. They're trying to get there to get some form of consultation. It is just not happening. And it is also pitting vaccinated against unvaccinated. It is creating animosity in the workplace. And it is actually creating a sense of apathy among workers. It is doing more harm than good. It's like dividing to conquer. That's the way I see it. Let's divide and conquer. So if we get persons thinking a particular way, in the workspace, people say, oh, I don't want anybody standing by me who is not vaccinated because I took the vaccine. Or an unvaccinated person might say, I don't want vaccinated people by me because they can also get the virus and pass it on to me. And I will suffer more because they're vaccinated, the effects that I will have. It's creating too much animosity. It's creating a lot of tension. And it is creating a lot of anger. I've never seen so many suicides in Antigua as we have had within the last year. And I want to believe, as a counselor, that a lot of that came from stress, it came from anxiety, and it came from a sense of not knowing what to do. Where do I go next? People are out there and they're hurting. Where is my next dollar coming from? If I don't take the vaccine, I cannot go to work. Nobody's employing me unless I take the vaccine. I cannot come in on a flight to Antigua unless I have taken the vaccine, because they will not issue me a boarding pass if I do not have a vaccine certificate.
Doctor, allow me to bring in Doctor. Allow me to bring in Doctor.
Too much stress, too much anger, too much tension. Antoine.
Yes, we have the internet. Doctor, I mean, based on what Ms. Mack has laid out, how do we consolidate, right, and try to marshal the effort that is needed in this crisis? You would have mentioned as a bright spot, that was your exact language, that the COVID vaccination rates in Antigua is a bright spot on the horizon. But can we call it a bright spot if that has been gained through methods, as has been described by Ms. Mack, which, as she has stated, has demotivated workers? Can we move labor in the direction to revitalize the economy if workers, some of them are displaced, but many are displeased? Your expert wisdom here. We're not hearing you. Are you?
I was offering the same courtesies that the distinguished colleagues offered me by muting. Thank you so much for making me unmute. I was saying that this is the 100-ton gorilla in every single room in CARICOM today. When you scratch, of course, the flavor that we've put on it in the discussion tonight, the question really becomes, the issue of vaccination, and increasingly that discussion that is an uncomfortable one for our society, of mandatory vaccination, whether in fact it is bringing more tensions in the workplace or less, whether it is in fact a panacea or whether it is contributing to a problem that is going to become entrenched. My own view on the matter is that I think we should step back and recognize that the issue is really how we get as a society to those fixes, the solutions to confronting COVID, and less so the statistic where people, some would have been given cause to become vaccinated when they didn't want otherwise to be, but others would have chosen to become vaccinated. The issue, though, really has to be how we get there. How did we get to employers and employees believing that this was the only way to go? Did we get there through a consultative process, which I've articulated in Grenada and other places is how we need to arrive at this? And I can tell you that I myself have participated in consultations with a number of groups, and at the end of the consultation, many of them voluntarily, without anyone holding this sword of Damocles over their head in terms of their employment, decided that they would become vaccinated. But I've also participated in other fora where the colleagues have decided, the participants have decided, many of them, not to become vaccinated. Now, I believe that there is room in our society, yes, for us to put the same protocols I spoke about earlier in place in a number of situations where vaccinated and unvaccinated people can, quote unquote, live harmoniously. Yes. I believe that those protocols need They need to be defined. They need to be based on this consultative process. And then they need to be taken into the agreements that the labor unions have in many instances with the employers. Notice I said they need to be brought in. I don't think that they need to, that we can visit these mandatory things on contracts where the contracts already have rights and obligations that are enshrined without at least having these very serious consultations. Now, where I think there is a hop, a skip, and a jump is my saying to you that there's some activities where I believe the need to become vaccinated, one could well argue, based on the level of inherent risk of spread. And I know many will disagree, but you know, I have a mother who has Alzheimer's with 2 or 3 caregivers. Many people work in medical facilities, and I would prefer, you can call it a comfort thing, I would prefer in those situations after consultations, if a decision was made that those persons should be vaccinated. There are other jobs where people can work at home, where employees can be tested, and we have to develop the protocols around those. We are really living in an arrangement which is now based more on contention and increasingly confrontation than on building consensus. And I fear that the space for us getting a resolution of this is narrowing quickly, because I do know that what Ms. Max said is true, that there's increasingly animosity, and unfortunately in our society, where you give people some information and not all, or where they don't take the time to absorb it properly, there is now beginning to be acrimony and conflict as well, in the way that she described. We need to fix that. All I'm saying is we need to fix it. But there is room to fix it, but the space is narrowing quickly. But I have to say that I believe that there's some things for which we would prefer to have persons vaccinated, but there still is room for many, many things that we're talking about today in employment in our societies, to have persons elect. And if they elect not to, the question becomes, what protocols do we put in place that will pick up, for instance, if there is an infection? That's really the way I look at it.
Thank you. Before I ask Mr. Robinson to come in, I think Mr. Cave is back with us. Mr. Cave, are you there? I think it is, we should have the Chamber of Commerce join us in this discussion. Are you hearing me, Mr. Cave? Seems not to be. Okay, so Mr. Robinson, the issue of consultations in weaving a social partnership so as to weave the rebound from this economic shock. From where you sit, how difficult is that? The same question. Is that something that we can still do?
Well, the thing is that, you see, from the level of the trade unions and trade unionists, we believe in social dialogue. In fact, it is part of the decent work agenda. And when you look at all those treaties and laws which were developed by CARICOM, it comes back to the same question. We have enough labor laws on the books throughout the Caribbean. The social dialogue is something that we have signed on to. We agreed based on the ILO conventions. A number of these countries should have signed on, you know. So the issue is for the governments of the region. I am focusing on the government because the government is the largest employer. And whatever example they set, they're influencing the private employers. You see? So we have been calling for social dialogue. We are genuine about that. In fact, we have even gone further by providing education to our members. We are doing this twice per month. We started out by providing education concerning the medical perspective of vaccination, COVID. And we have used the very doctors which are working very closely with the government to campaign and to push vaccination. Our level, we as a union, we are not against vaccination. We have even had a third rung of another doctor providing education to our members. So we are committed to provide the relevant information to our members. What we are not comfortable with is every time the government comes up with something, we consider it, we go back to our membership, we analyze, and we come back and we say, okay, we will strike a compromise here. For example, they speak about testing. At first, our members were kind of hesitant. We bend the rule and we say, okay, yes, let all our members be tested in going to the workplace, because that is the only way you would know whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. You could contract and spread the virus. So we embrace the whole concept of testing. Now, you're saying that you're going to ensure that all our members have to be vaccinated. And you have not really sat with us and say, well, let us examine. We know that fundamental rights and freedom are not absolute, you know, but there are people who have medical conditions, there are people who for religious reasons, and there are people just because of their idea or their thought, their philosophy of something. And you can't just throw all those things away under the name of COVID. Yes, COVID is a reality. The last thing that we saw the state is doing now is having a list of medical personnel you have to go to get an exemption, a medical exemption. So what happened to your family doctor, the person who you have already built up a relationship all over the years that you're comfortable with in advising you on your medical? So I think the state would have started out handling this thing in a very bad way. When you have people in authority telling you, oh, if you don't take the vaccine, you're out of a job, you will be fired. You know, leave the technocrats to lead the campaign. And I'm not saying that politicians do not have they must not exercise and demonstrate their political will for something of a nature of public health. I'm not saying that. But the point of the matter is how you go about influencing people to do something. People by nature would resist when you want to force them to do something that is against their will. And as we know, everybody do not learn at the same rate and the same time. It takes some time before some people could get the message.
And so let me jump in right here then, because this is the time that our government, certainly my government, is saying that we do not have, that this COVID-19 has come as an exogenous shock, and the economy has been in free fall for well over a year. So how much time is a reasonable time? And the further question is, if workers are not willingly coming for the vaccines, how do you explain to the business person? I mean, we have lost many businesses. A lot of medium-sized and small businesses have closed. Is it that, and I'm being the devil's advocate, is it that our union, the labor side of the economy, or the labor side of the productive element, is unwilling to compromise? Because that is the feeling that government has, that some of the demands made by the unions are not reasonable and they're not conducive to the type of economic get up and go that is required at this time. How would we respond to that? And Dr. Antoine, I'd let you go first. I'm not sure if you're having similar discussions in Grenada, balancing the need for the economy to go now versus massaging personal positions on the vaccines. We have a mandate.
I think that let's accept that as common ground that the governments have all handled this badly, all of them. It was exogenous, but there were models that the governments could have adopted quite early you know, in dealing with this, and certainly in providing the public with the sort of education. And even if you took the view that you're an anti-vaxxer or you support vaccination, you know, just getting information that would allow persons to be well educated on the issue and the issue surrounding COVID. And I think we lost a lot of valuable time. And now I think we're running into some other problems where, you know, we have this need to grow, because a healthy labor force is really a precondition for a healthy economy. I said to people that this is one time when sort of, you know, the priorities with health and the priorities with the economy are the same. If we don't get this situation really on, you know, brought under control on the health side, we're not going to see the economic growth and performance that we want. And again, that's really, you know, that's I think a well-known and well-established fact. So the question becomes, with 30-something% unemployment and poverty levels growing, governments running out of money, debts escalating, how much time is sufficient time to have this engagement? My view is that there is time. My view is that it really depends on the modalities that we put in place to have these consultations. I think they needed to be intense. This is, in fact, if you wish, a state of emergency, not just in relation to the powers of the act, but in terms of how we need to act in responding. And I don't think in many instances we've approached that state of emergency as really extending to all sort of interactions in our society. And this is an important interaction. And I think this need for consultation, which to my mind is an absolute necessity, that we've seen that as a missing ingredient in so many other types of interactions between the private sector and governments, and also the private sector and unions. There's so many things that absolutely requires it. And because we don't do this, or we haven't done it, what happens is that we've now eroded trust. And this issue of trust, the real question in many instances, how do you rebuild that trust? That even if I sat with you, I heard the colleague from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I take no sides on this. I simply address it as a phenomenon where, right or wrong, the parties feel that the trust is broken. And I think what we really have to do in these countries is that we have to lock things down and decide that we're going to engage in structured, time-bound, intense consultations, come out with a protocol that we can all sign on to on how we're going to combat this thing. Now, the protocol may have issues that we can't agree on, but it's still a protocol. It still has a number of areas of common ground and in areas where we have to continue working on. And we need to work on that deliberately to bring our societies to the point where I think we can really combat this. But I understand the challenges of governments. As I said, all the indicators have trended south, and there's an urgency. Even if they were, for instance, to follow the IMF recommendation, I looked at it some days ago for the whole region, and the IMF is telling you to do all the right things. But here's the thing, the governments don't have the money to do it. You know, you should put a digitalization plan in place, and you should have a strategy that deals with financial and climate change resilience, and you should do this and do that. It all depends on this one thing, us getting the economy up and running. And that has to be our preoccupation. We can do this, you know. We've fought these challenges in the past before. Unfortunately, I think we've allowed the time to elapse, and we need to rebuild the trust. That's my last words on it.
Ms. Mack, would you like to share your comments on that issue in terms of how do we rebuild that trust, and is that repairable? Ms. Mack, are you hearing me? Okay. Let me change our discussion a little bit, because the issue, how then do we move forward in the context of COVID-19? The desire and the need
Hi.
for workplace.
Oh, I could hear you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Are you hearing me now? Hello? Are you hearing us now? Miss Mac?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay.
Yes, I can. Yes, I am.
Very good. I was
Can
about
you
to
hear
ask.
me? Yes,
I am here.
you.
I was about to ask the question: What are some,
Hearing you.
what are some of the alternative protocols that can be put in place then in workplaces?
Okay.
Oh, this is very difficult. I'm going to ask the question, and perhaps Mr. Robinson, you can pick up if Miss Mack is not able to hear. Several times throughout the night, Dr. Antoine would have stated
to be consultation to look at possible, and this, because it is a the government is saying
Ms. Mack, we're not hearing you at all. The connection is quite unstable. Okay, I think she has dropped out. So I wanted us to transition into the question of solutions, because our time is really winding down. The idea that there are alternative ways to incorporate COVID-19 risk management measures within workplaces, protocols. Dr. Antoine would have mentioned work from home modalities and looking at COVID-19 proofing workplaces, so to speak, so that you could probably foster a greater between employer and employee. I don't know if you have looked at these types of modalities, Mr. Robinson, and if you wish to share any alternatives that your union would have shared with the government.
Well, St. Vincent and Grenadines, we have had extensive, from the level of the Education Advisory Board, of which I represented the Teachers Union, we have had extensive consultation surveys with various stakeholders in education, parents, security guards, teachers, you name it, everybody who interfaces with the education sector. And a number of things would have emerged, right? Now we know that one size cannot fit all. Depending on the size of a school, there are some schools which teachers may be able to go back in full and absorb the physical distances. There are some who may not be able to. So a blended approach, an alternative approach, bearing in mind that there is still the lower grades here in St. Vincent and Grenadines, which we call the grade K students. They have not been having any classes. I know the government made an effort and mobilize devices, which are now being rolled out for grades 1 and grades 2, because the grade 1 students did not have their devices last year, and that is a good effort that must be commended. And I know that they have made arrangement with some of the telecommunication companies where you could pay $20 per month and have data in the event that you do not have internet, that you'll be able to log on. But as I said, the internet providers are still lagging behind. They need to up their games. The issue of liability, of adverse reactions from vaccinations and deaths. You see, from our standpoint as a trade union, we have had so many issues with the employer, the government. We have a history of government not honoring their promises and their commitments, even violating our collective agreements on a number of occasions. We have to go in court. So you have to understand we are coming from that history, that backdrop, but we are still willing to have dialogue in the interest of our nation because we believe our teachers are so committed to the children. In fact, there was one occasion when the teachers made a decision that they're not going to work. But after contemplation and they reflected and they did some introspection, the teachers went back to work. And I couldn't really blame them because a person could change their mind at any time. If your conscience is bothering you about something, you want to have a free conscience. So our teachers are committed, and we could testify to that because they have taught all through the last year. They managed shelters, they taught online, they visited homes of students who they couldn't connect with, and they are making that effort to reach the children. We are making a point that if you could say to the teachers of this nation that accept liability for if you take the vaccine, if you have adverse effects or deaths, then a lot more teachers would take the vaccine. There are many teachers who are taking the vaccines, you know. Some of them have issues related to their right to their religion. You know, some of them have issues related medically. So if you could have that trust that they'll be granted their exemptions, then you would have the vaccination rate being increased. People would be more comfortable. You cannot tell me that you say to the nation, I am not going to make vaccination mandatory. And shortly after that, within 2 days' time, you see an SR and who comes out say, you have to take the vaccine. So the issue of trust is something that is important. We are saying all workers going to the workplace must be tested. But the government is pushing vaccination. Nobody is telling us about any other treatment.
Well, our government here has basically stated that testing everyone is not possible. Dr. Antoine mentioned the fiscal constraints and the fact that governments have no money. But let me extrapolate on that, Dr. Antoine. The need for a different approach to managing the workplaces, anything other than vaccination, seems to require some financial investment as well, right? And I'm talking even in the private sector, these new concepts of work from home or having social distancing within the workplace itself or running a sort of shift system, all in the interest of trying to keep people employed. The private sector, and I'm sorry we have lost our Chamber of Commerce representative, but in Antigua and Barbuda, our government has not provided any subventions or support, should I say stimulus. And so the private sector is finding it difficult to, one, keep people employed, two, make the sort of investments that could create an environment where you may not need the vaccines. And so the default is simply for vaccination. I mean, I don't know if that has been your experience in Grenada as well, but it requires money to do the sorts of adjustments that we're asking for.
So I think it's certainly the true position lies somewhere between those two extremes. I believe that it is optimal for us to all be vaccinated, those who can be without health risk. I do believe, as with everything else, there are persons who would choose not to for reasons. And I think that those then have to be viewed as exceptions and they have to be treated on a case-by-case basis. The true position is that for the broad population in a services-oriented economy, where a lot of what we offer really is based on instilling confidence in consumers, in the persons who have to come to visit, yes, invariably, we're going to have to, certainly in the case of Antigua and those other service-oriented economies in the Eastern Caribbean, we're going to have to look at this thing perhaps a little more severely than if, for instance, we had an agrarian economy where, you know, we could do without persons coming in and the perceptions weren't that great, etc. And I mean, I say this very, very sincerely, that quite unfortunately, because we've become so integrated with the global community, and because this is now becoming a global standard. In fact, you go to places now and persons are asking for your vaccination card. You go to a number of places and persons want to know if your staff is vaccinated. And I think those things are, you see that there are exceptions, and there's some airlines that are allowing their staff not to, and so on and so on. But the truth is that the broad trend is headed in that direction. And the issue that you raised before is with this strong headwinds that we face in Antigua, in Grenada, in all of these countries where we are heavily service oriented and where people are now competing for visitors on the basis that they are X% vaccinated, and the hotels are all put in such a way that they conform to these protocols and guidelines. And if you can't keep pace with that, it's the standard word competitiveness. If you aren't able to compete, we are going to have a very, very difficult time in this part of the world. So we have to find a solution that is unique. You know, living in the shadow of Goliath and essentially not being as strong as Goliath, but being dependent on what happens in North America and in Europe. We're going to have to find some solutions that really takes on board more so than others this global orientation, but which nonetheless recognizes that there are some very important rights that we've fought for, that we have to sit down and perhaps reconceptualize, if you wish, without necessarily giving them up, right? How do we reformulate and reconceptualize those rights now that the environment has changed? And it's not absolute. The unions must not, and many of them are not, I'm happy to hear my colleague from St. Vincent speak this way, must not stand in resistance to everything because the trust is broken. It is easy to do. It is tempting. Similarly, governments must not feel that because unions have not stood their ground on many things, because unions now appear to be standing their ground, right, that it means that really they are, if you wish, in opposition to them. That's the word I want to use, right? You know, we can hold different positions without feeling that we engage in this spar where it's government and opposition. So as soon as you object to government policy, you immediately become opposition. And let me say that for many things that will confront us going forward, how do we deal with the fact that the variants are going to come? Because if we open to tourism, it's going to come with it. We can't keep shutting down and fighting because the next round of vaccinations that may be boosters, we decide that we either not going to take it or we're going to have it foisted on us mandatorily. We have to find a way to talk to each other, recognizing that no employee can do well, no union can do well if the economy does badly. And if the economy is doing badly, yes, it makes it even more challenging at that time to deal with the health risk. So that we are bond together. My own solution is that we need a CARICOM fix to this. We need a national fix to this. We need two fixes. We need a CARICOM fix. When I travel from Grenada to St. Vincent to work, because I do have freedom of movement, what can I expect as a CARICOM national moving in the space to a country to work in the same sector? We would want that to be as similar as possible. But we're going to have to sit together and find these compromises. But I understand where the governments are. I understand where the workers are. And I'm simply making the point that there's room quickly for us to close that gap, but it is narrowing, is what I'm saying tonight. It is narrowing, but there is room for us to find that consensus.
Thank you. Ms. Mack, are you now hearing me clearly? Are you back with us fully?
Yes, I hear you now.
Okay, very good. Now I know the TUC
Yes,
here.
I hear you now. Yes.
The TUC here represents a number of unions. That is
Hello?
the umbrella. I am hearing you, Ms. Mack. I'm hearing you. Okay. Right. So the
I am.
TUC. No, I don't think we have you at all. Okay. I think I'll have to come back to you again. I think I may have to come back to you again, Ms. Mack. Are you hearing me now?
All I hear is T.
Okay, I was going to ask the question. I know that your organization represents quite a number of unions, and therefore unions between
No, I can hear you. Yes.
unions between the public sector and the private sector. You're hearing me? And this includes hotel workers. At the beginning of this crisis, we were told that hotel workers were essential workers. And so they would, by necessity, have to be vaccinated in order for the economy to reopen. Are you following me? I want to make sure you can hear me. Are you following me? Very good.
Yes, I can.
So, however, with our recent mandates here in Antigua, basically all workers have been made essential workers. I know that a number of unions have challenged the mandatory vaccination in court. Do you have any insight on where those challenges are going, or if there's been any movement, particularly as it relates to private sector unions? Wow. Yes, this is. So you didn't hear the question at all? Okay. All right. So let me ask Mr. Robinson that question then. Here in Antigua, we moved from our hotel workers and healthcare workers being essential to everyone being essential. Our government has recently basically put out an edict that all private sector companies with 5 or more staff must have all their staff vaccinated. The question I was attempting to ask Ms. Mack is that there has been some challenges filed in the court, and I was wondering if there was any updates. I don't know if you have a similar situation in St. Vincent. Yes. Ms. Mack, if you have heard me, you can answer. No. Okay, so Mr. Robinson, you can handle that question then.
Yes. You see, it comes back again to the point I made earlier.
Have any some things were filed. Update on those.
Okay, I think I got the gist of that. Every worker cannot be an essential worker. I got that. Mr. Robinson?
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, even before the law was made in the House of Parliament, even before it was gazetted, even before the Governor General would have given its assent, the government was already telling the public sector employees that give them the green light, and I'm paraphrasing, that they should ensure that their workers are vaccinated. And at the same time, the government was saying they do not have a mandatory vaccination policy. So there were conflicting information coming from the state. We have learned from what has happened to the public sector injunction which were taking place in Antigua and Guyana, and we see that did not work. Okay, now we have always been hearing the government saying the vaccination is for the public good. The question is, who is the public? Because if the majority of people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines not taking the vaccine, who are you protecting? You see? So we have taken a decision from our membership that we will take the government to court if you're going to mandate vaccines, because you told us in the first place your vaccination policy is not mandatory. And then overnight you went to the house and you're mandating that persons be vaccinated to come on the job. And this is a unilateral decision. You have changed the conditions of work of persons who have already worked for 30, 40 years, almost 40 years. And if they are not vaccinated, what is going to happen to their pension and their gratuity? What is the value of that development that those workers would have contributed to the country? 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And then you're going to tell me you have to be vaccinated or you cannot come to the workplace? Are there any treatments for COVID? Have we done enough research and provide that information to the workers?
Yeah, that goes to the question of reasonableness and proportionality in terms of the government's approach. But
Yeah.
Dr. Antoine, you mentioned that in your estimation, we require a CARICOM response. Now, this is something that has been stated. I've heard it said by a number of other public figures, including political actors. But how realistic is that? Because I know that, for example, not all countries of the region have implemented a vaccine mandate for workers. And we see the Prime Minister of Barbados, for example, taking a totally different position than most of her CARICOM counterparts. And so the idea that we will have a regional approach to tackling COVID seems very unlikely. Whilst, of course, you have various unions around the region, as you've just heard, launching challenges against their governments. How likely is a CARICOM collaborative, coordinated approach to dealing with this? Let me also add, before you answer, that I know our countries of the region are busy competing against each other for that scarce tourist dollar, right? That is happening as we speak. So I don't know if even at a regional level, we have the context for collaboration and cooperation.
Yeah, so I think that we've lost a lot of valuable time in reaching a CARICOM solution on this. I was disappointed because in another capacity, I would have raised as the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Beverage Alcohol Alliance, representing the beverage alcohol industry, which is every single place you will find it, hotels, restaurants, bars, etc. 100 and something thousand workers who were at the time on lockdown. That in order to get our countries essentially exiting lockdown successfully, that we needed a CARICOM response, which of course we needed to start facilitating travel amongst ourselves We had a great opportunity with the bubble. We blew that up. We blew that up. We had another opportunity very early before countries started engaging in unilateral action to really discuss and to do more than discuss, to actually come up with a protocol, which we failed to do. We sort of came to the point where we recognized that workers had rights and the employers had rights, and that if you didn't want to be mandatory to be vaccinated, for scratch mandatory, that it would be the testing would be frequent, and it would be at the employee's cost, because many of the governments couldn't bear it, and that's as far as we got. There was no protocol to guide us. Where do we go now? I believe that it is not too late for us to move to some harmonized approach on this. It doesn't mean that we have to move to the same approach today, but I think I'd prefer to see more harmony on this rather than less. And while some matters are before the courts in a number of the countries, and we will see more, I do see that there's some legal opinions out there too that does bear taking into. We have to take those into account. And my own view is that it would be good for us, without prejudice to what is happening in the court, and I say so respectfully, but I would hope that governments and the unions can stand down these matters and reach some kind. I'm telling you, I stand down these matters.
Optimism. That is a lot of optimism, Doctor.
And take a different approach, because I think what will happen is that what the colleague said about the resentment that's becoming deep, ultimately, it could lead in some places to regime change. And you see, you don't want that pendulum to swing too far left, because we are facing a crisis, and you want it to be measured and reasonable. And I dare say that matters might be left there while the discussions take place, is another negotiating approach. But we have to find a way to close the distance on this. It's not going to go away. And the numbers that I see in Jamaica, 22%. In Grenada, 26%. Some countries are faring better than others, but the rates there are slowing as well. Trinidad, I think 42%. Europe at about 46%, of the population vaccinated. But there's so many countries where the hesitancy is strong that I fear going to court or mandatorily enforcing it without having a social consensus on this is not going to get us to where we want to get to protect our population very soon. That is what concerns me. I have to tell you that at the core of it all, that is what concerns me. A weak Grenada, a strong Antigua is not going to do very much for our community. We want all to make our countries strong at the same time, and we want our populations to be healthy. And I do see that the colleague from St. Vincent again raised the fact that there are other cures and other treatments and so on, experimental, that's coming onto, certainly it's going to be entering the market soon. And I think we also have to take those into account in terms of putting this protocol in place, so that we may not be facing this exact problem in a year. But the protocol must also be able to take into account that it's not just vaccination, there are other treatments that we would want to admit into the solution set at that time. So it's dynamic, and you need a dynamic protocol. We can't be static and come down with the big stick. So that's really where I come at this. And I dare say that we've missed an opportunity. The government should have led in all the countries. They were caught flat-footed. It is, in fact, a pandemic. It is the whole world was caught flat-footed. But now we can respond, and it is not too late. It is never too late to talk. I can tell you, it is never too late for dialogue.
Thank you. Ms. Mack, I so want to give you the opportunity to come in, but I wonder if your internet is a bit more stable now for you to join us. Are you hearing me? No. Unfortunately, We seem still not to have Miss
That-
Mac.
I think that they can. You can hear me.
We're hearing you. Please go.
I can hear you.
Please go. No.
That there is still a lot of us under government. We notice in terms of wanting, and that is they don't seem in that frame of mind. It's you die. That's basically what, and we see there's still that window of opportunity.
Well, we have
Dialogue to take place.
Miss Mac, we're not hearing you.
And that can come back. It's just that hear me?
We're not. You're breaking up very badly. You're breaking up very badly. So I'm going to move on again and allow you to jump back in again. Listen, this panel, I have to tell you, I feel
breaking up.
Yeah. I feel as though we will have to have this discussion again, because I can well imagine it has been very difficult for our viewers with this internet interruption. But as we are 10 minutes away from close time, I wanted to ask the question, gentlemen. Do we have any appreciable number or statistics at this point in terms of how many persons would have lost their job or would have become unemployed, not simply because of COVID-19, but because of their refusal to be vaccinated? And what would be the likely impact on that sector and the economy in general if so many people are leaving the workforce? Even if you don't have an exact amount, I think you can speak in terms of anecdotally what you may know. You have a sense of how many persons have really lost their employment because of vaccination? Is that a sectoral issue? Is it likely to have a ripple national effect?
Should I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the number of persons who have lost their job, you could count them on your finger. You could count them on your hand, on one hand, right? And these were really persons who were involved in protesting. You know?
Oh.
So right away, you see the government was using a draconian attitude and style without even using due process. We have something in our country called the YES program, where you give young people job orientation. Okay? You train them for a year or two, but you give them a small stipend. And because they go on a picket line or a protest line, you fire such person. You even provide them with education because they are not unionized, and you fire them. And there was a teacher who was imprisoned, was locked up on 2 occasions because she stand out and protested. You see? And then he had another teacher who just got a job, a teacher 1 on the YES program, and that person was fired because the person refused to take the vaccine. You see? I think the government has moved too quickly to legislate this vaccination.
So hold on, Mr. Robinson. Just to be clear, you're saying that the government has actually fired an employee for being
Yeah,
unvaccinated.
there was a nurse who was on the protest line, and she got a phone call from somebody in authority to state that there's a letter there for them to collect. And the letter was stating that the policy, your services are no longer required. And this is sad. And these are young people. And you're greeting them rather than calling them and exercise due process and have a warning letter or talking to them if you think that they should not be there. I mean, again, that is if you're with a trade union and you're protesting, you have a protection on the Trade Union Act, a right to protest. You see, trade unions now have to get permit. They are telling you have to get permission, and quoting some 1950 something Public Order Act, which is outdated. That is long before we had independence. And our independence, we have our constitution that gives you the fundamental right of association and assembly peacefully. And you're taking action against people for that in the name of vaccination.
Yes.
But I also believe that CARICOM has a plan, because a lot of the CARICOM countries were moving towards mandatory vaccination, and a lot of them were involved in arresting people, manhandling people when they went out to protest. That was their plan. But I agree with Dr. Antoine that you need a more cohesive, a more organized approach, and education must be an essential component. You have to reach the people and talk with them. I mean, you mentioned the Prime Minister of Barbados was a different approach.
Yes. Ms.
So
Mack,
there was this resistance, the approach by the governments of the region to come out and lock up people because they protest, exercising their fundamental right of association and assembly. And then you go swiftly to legislate to make vaccination mandatory. I mean,
well, my Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, is actually now the chairman of CARICOM, and he has been the most diabolical, for lack of a better word, in terms of these mandates. So if we're looking for a CARICOM solution, Dr. Antoine, I'm afraid that it would not be as collaborative, right, and partnership oriented as you would have preferred. But let me see if Ms. Mack is back with us. I'm really itching for her to join this conversation before we leave. Ms. Mack, are you with us?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Based on your knowledge,
yes, I can hear.
We're hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Has a lot of your members lost for failing to be vaccinated? Do you have any idea as to how many workers have left the workforce because they have not been vaccinated?
They have not. They were told that they without pay.
They're still on leave without pay?
That is what public sector workers told. They were saying they were fighting men that leave without they decide to take the vaccine. Or they can produce an exemption.
But
that's what it is.
But from where I sit, Ms. Mack,
I know in some private sector,
right,
areas asked to stay home without pay, so we don't know about them with those.
Oh my! All right, Dr. Antoine, we are going to.
That's the teach home until vaccinated or they use an exam.
Got it. Got it. That is for the public sector. But Dr.
And I think that
Antoine,
there's a procedure in place through for that information regarding the exam.
okay, I think we got the most of that. Miss Mack, thank you so much. It is now 3 minutes to 7. I think that I'm going to be forced to ask us to go into our closing remarks, unfortunately. Our internet has not been our friend. That's one thing that I think, Dr. Antoine, you need to work on and urge at a CARICOM level as well, in terms of our connectivity levels and any trajectory for moving forward with technology advancements. So let us go to roundup and closing remarks. We've lost Ms. Mack. We've lost Mr. Martin Cave. We never really heard from the Chamber of Commerce, unfortunately. And so I'm going to ask you men that if the DNA may need to re-invite you to a forum, again, that you so oblige and be present so we can have this conversation in a more fluid manner. So let us go to closing remarks. Dr. Antoine, I'll begin with you in terms of where do you see us heading in the long term based on these shocks that are being visited upon our economy and the displacement of workers, really, whether through COVID or through failure of vaccination?
Yeah, so I think our region is in a particularly precarious position where we are not left in the immediate period with many options. It is certainly the case that as it now stands with the state of technology and with what we are facing as small economies in a very hostile global community, which it always has been, but which it has really now been manifest by a massive reduction in any development assistance to small countries like ours, and
Yes.
certainly with a very clear orientation as well that we are all engaged in a race, and as middle-income countries or high-income countries, in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, certainly a high middle-income country, there really is not a lot of safe harbor that you can sort of go to or rely on to get us through this crisis. We're going to have to produce ourselves out of this dilemma, and as service-oriented economies where we need to move quickly. I fear that the mandates that your government's given, while it may have come without the requisite consultation, listening from some of the participants on this panel tonight, that is the direction that many governments may find that they have to take if they are to traverse the next 2 years successfully. I still argue that a long-term fix to this problem will depend on consultation and really having a social consensus on how we deal not just with this, but with other pandemics that will beset us. And the region still has an opportunity, the countries themselves, and certainly at the community level, to re-engage this subject. Failure to do so will see us go through the same cycle of openings and lockdowns as we've seen in the last several 19 months or so. In relation to the industrial relations climate and to industrial relations in general, it is also a very dangerous period where workers themselves are finding that they're not going to be able to benefit from the remunerations, even where in contract they're due, because the government simply cannot afford them. And I think that we all joined on this, where economic policy and wage policy is in fact tied to health policy. And we want to ensure that in all that we do, we have a healthy labor force, strong and prosperous economy. And this is why we all have the same objective, the same sort of impulses that ought to motivate us to sitting and reaching a social contract, a social consensus easy. That's how I view it. And we are going into some very stiff headwinds where the inflation rate is going to outpace the wage increases. If you read The Economist and you start seeing the signs, then we have some more price increases coming, which is going to put labor and employees under tremendous pressure. We need to work together more than ever now in the countries and in CARICOM to get through this period. And I'm very committed to it. I'd be happy to be back on your program and we'll not be set with some of the difficulties that we've had tonight. But it's been an excellent program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Antoine. You've been gracious, and we will capitalize on that, certainly. Mr. Robinson, your closing remarks, please.
Yes, I want to begin. I want to continue where I begin. The issue of social dialogue is very high on our agenda. We believe that we must have meaningful conversations. I would really want the politicians to redefine consultation. Don't come and tell us and expect us to rubber stamp. We have ideas too. We represent workers who are not robots. They have flesh and blood, they have feelings, they have families, they have emotions, and we must add some value to the ideas that we would bring to the table. I believe the opportunity is still here with us for us to rub shoulders and come out with the best solutions. I believe that if you're going to push vaccination mandatory, you must accept liability for any adverse effects or death. I also believe that testing must be done because we know the science has shown us that people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, both categories of persons, contract and spread the virus. And the surest way to know if a person is coming to the workplace in a safe body is to produce a test. Among all the other protocols, you do your hand sanitizing, your temperature checks. If there are workers if we reach to the stage where everybody has to take the vaccine and there are workers who, for some reason, their exemptions are not granted, I believe that there should be a compensation package for them. Because it's very hard for you to work almost 30-something, close to 40 years, and you have to go home without anything just because you refuse to take a vaccine. So again, I'm excited to be here. I have learned a lot from the doctor and my good friend, Grenada. It's my good friend, yes. And I'm excited to be here, and I would make myself available as long as I have the health and the strength. And I want to wish you all the best. Colleagues, it was an honor to share this platform with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. The DNA is really glad to hear that. And we get a last hurrah from Miss Mac. Are we on now? Please.
Yes, I hope I am on now. I just want to say it has been an honor, and I just want to say that the COVID vaccine and what is happening with it has had an impact on industrial relations in every country. And I just want to say that there is still room for dialogue. There is still room for consultation between the government and the unions. And anything that affects a worker affects the economy. And anything that affects a worker affects the union representing that worker. And so we need to work together. There has to be collaboration, and there needs to be more dialogue. More dialogue. Instead of declarations, and you must dialogue. That is all we're asking for. People have a right, and unions have the right to represent workers. We still have that right. Thank you very much for being part of the program. It has been a pleasure, in spite of all the technical difficulties.
Yes, apparently we seem to be having island-wide internet issues.
Yes.
I'm getting feedback that our live feed has been a bit choppy. So I want to thank you, the three of you. I've been in contact as well with our fourth panelist who never really got to come on and stay with us. He sends his well wishes and says good night. But I also want to thank our viewers who have stayed with us tonight. Again, the DNA has an open invitation for the three of you, for the four of you to return. So thank you, Antigua and Barbuda. Thank you, the region, and thank you, the world, for joining us on, once again, another edition of the National Consultation Series on COVID-19. This has been a DNA production, and it is brought to you as a public service so that together we can seek to conquer COVID-19. Thank you all and good night. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.